This episode of the Fine Homebuilding Pro Talk podcast is brought to you by Andersen Windows. If you're a window installer, you deserve a simple choice: Andersen 400 Series windows. They're the windows contractors trust the most, based on a 2022 survey of U.S. contractors. Probably because they have fewer callbacks and extra peace of mind. And thanks to shortened lead times, they're available faster. Make your go-to windows Andersen 400 Series. Request a quote at andersenwindows.com.
Keeping things timeless and the stuff that's not easy to change, like a counter. If somebody is keeping their counters, that's probably going to be one of the first places I go to look for color clues, because I need to have something that's going to coordinate with that counter, because that's not going anywhere.
Welcome to the Fine Homebuilding Pro Talk podcast, a regular discussion with building industry professionals. This is Senior Editor Patrick McComb. Today I'm joined by color consultant and designer Paula Gaull of Marblehead, Massachusetts. You can find the Fine Homebuilding Pro Talk podcast and the original Fine Homebuilding podcast at finehomebuilding.com/podcast. You can leave feedback and ask questions there too. It is a terrible time to ask now, Paula, but did I say your name correctly? Is it Gaull?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. You got that right.
Thank you so much for being on the show. Can you please tell me what a color consultant does?
Sure. So we are folks that come in and help people pick out paint colors and paint palettes and all kinds of colors for their house in a way that makes sense to save them a lot of frustration down the road. We try and get it right the first time, using what we know about color theory and other things to pull together a color palette.
And when do folks ordinarily bring you into the process? Can I guess it's usually later than you would like?
Yeah, that's generally the case. It all depends on the project. In a new build kind of situation, we honestly should be right near the beginning, because so many of the choices that they're going to make about their finishes and their fixtures and things like that are going to be dependent on whatever the whole house palette is. So we really should be in earlier rather than later in the process.
And how does one become a color consultant? What are the skills you need to help people pick their color palette and colors for their furnishings?
Well, there's a bunch of training that you should be doing, which I did. There are lots of courses on color theory and just how to put together colors in a way that makes sense. And once you get certified in that, then a lot of it is just kind of looking around at things that seem to work from a color perspective, colors that you like the look of together. And, even in nature, you can look around and see, how things are put together in nature. That's usually a good cue for how things are going to look good in another setting, because nature seems to always sort of get it right.
Have you always had an interest in color and design? Was there someone who influenced you to have this interest?
I've always had an interest in it. I wasn't always in that field. I was in a lot of other, not a lot, but I was in, marketing and communications and visual presentation of hospitality marketing, things like that, things that, kind of take those elements into account, but that wasn't my specialty. And I was working for a software company that just sort of felt, I don't even know how to describe it, except it felt very gray. Everything they wanted to do was very gray to me. And I just kind of had this epiphany that I needed to be surrounded by color. Didn't want to come into work every day and be gray. So that was sort of the start of my journey into kind of taking a detour into a more colorful life. That was about 15 years ago.
I, you know, I think the work you do is important to, a home's design, a room's design, uh, and you can get it wrong. I'm guessing you also think that's true.
Yeah, you can get it. You can get it very wrong. Um, so really, what my job is to save that angst and save that anxiety for clients and for customers who really get really almost paralyzed with not being able to pick out colors. I think Benjamin Moore has something like, I want to say 140 different shades of white. So even if you think you want white, um, people can get really stuck on what's the right white because there's so many undertones and so many different variations. And so, yeah, I'm there to sort of make sure that things don't go terribly wrong, just by knowing how to pull everything together in a way that looks cohesive right from the start.
We met because your home was being painted by our friend Brooke Cambridge and her company, and you were trying to pick the color of your front door. You have a historic home, and it was fascinating to talk to you about this. Um, you had a sample from the paint store and sample cards or boards. Uh, I can't remember all the points we talked about, but can you talk about how you use a sample board to evaluate a color in its situation and to see it different times of day, please?
Sure. So, what I like to tell my clients is, when we're choosing colors, we're kind of choosing colors to audition. When I go in and do a session with somebody and we come out with colors that we've chosen, they're not usually the only colors that they're gonna consider. We usually have a few different options, and so I always tell them that they should paint colors onto a sample board. You can get a sample jar of paint. I know Benjamin Moore makes sample jars of paint, and a sample board that you paint up. And I like to do a sample board or a few different sample boards instead of painting right on the surface that they're considering. Because what happens is if you paint right on the surface that you're considering, say, in my case, I have a black door that I wanted to paint a pretty salmon color instead. But if I painted right on that black door, first of all, you could get bleed through from the surface behind it. That's going to kind of influence the color that you're painting on top of it. But you're also going to be seeing the new color relative to the color that's next to it or that's under it. So you're not really going to be able to evaluate it in a true way because you're looking at it compared to the color that it's sitting on. So the color may look more pink or may more orange or more red depending on what color is sitting on it. But if it's sitting on a sample board with a sheet of white behind it to give it a neutral background, you're going to get a much truer read on the color. And with the sample board, the other cool thing you can do, doesn't apply with my front door, but in a room or an exterior of a house, you can move that board around and see it at different times of day, different light conditions, high up on the wall, low down on the wall. So you can really get a better sense of what the color is going to look like when you're done.
And it's important to check at different times of day, right? Because it's going to look different depending
Yes.
on whether it's in direct sun or in shade. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. So, as you know, if you when you live in your house, you see the sun move around, right, from sunrise to sunset. The sun is going to move around your house and it's going to change how a room looks depending on where the sun is in the sky, if it's high, if it's low, if it's east, if it's west. It also, I mean, depends upon, what the exposure is of your windows. Um, so, if you have a south facing room, your colors are going to represent warmer, and because you're going to get a real warm light. Or if your room faces north or east, you're going to get a cooler light, and that's going to affect the colors. So it's important to kind of watch the color during the day and see how it changes. In the morning, it's going to look very different than it does, as the sun's getting ready to go down. And even at night, once the sun goes down, you should see how the color looks when you just have your lights turned on, and make sure that you like how it looks that way because it's going to look completely different when there's no natural light coming through the windows.
One thing I've observed is sometimes I like colors better, obviously, as you were mentioning, at different times of day, right? Because of the light coming through the windows or the artificial lighting I'm using in the space. I'm guessing you would tell people to pick the color based on the lighting conditions where you're going to be in the room the most. Is that a fair general rule?
Yeah, exactly. So, you know, if it's your kitchen and you want to, have your cup of coffee in a nice, bright, sunny feeling room, that should be a consideration. That comes into play a lot, actually, um, when people are doing dining rooms. A dining room is a place where you can get a little bit more bold with a color because you're not in it that often. It's not it's not one of those rooms that you're in all day long, so you can get a little bit more adventurous with your color there because you're usually in there at night, and you usually are not in there for big chunks of time, right? So, yeah, you definitely should consider. Um, when you're gonna be in the room, how you want to feel most of the time. So that comes into play, with bedrooms. If you want your bedroom to feel restful and spa-like, you're gonna choose a color that's gonna feel like that, um, as opposed to, maybe you want a different kind of feel for your dining room or your family room.
On that subject, what other examples of colors elicit certain emotions in people, and how does that play out in your recommendations on what colors they should choose for respective spaces in their home?
So there's a whole field of color psychology that gets applied, whether it's in interior design or you see it a lot actually in branding for companies when they're choosing logos. They really want to take into consideration, what they want their logo to convey and communicate, depending on what their company is, right? So different colors can evoke certain different emotions. For example, blue is known to be restful and peaceful, which is why you see it in bedrooms a lot. It also evokes, from a branding standpoint, people will tell you loyalty and a feeling of being trustworthy. So you'll see brands that want to communicate that might go for blue in their logo. Um, Green is healthy. It evokes a feeling of health, so you'll see that in a lot of healthcare settings. You'll also see it with companies that want to, that are trying to be an organic kind of company. They may choose green for their logo. Um, there's a whole spectrum. You can do the whole spectrum of colors, and each one has a feeling associated with it. And so a lot of times when we're doing a house palette, we'll talk about how they want to feel in that room. Do they want to feel restful or do they want to feel energetic? Because it's usually those two things are kind of opposed to each other. It will be hard to find a color that's restful and energetic at the same time. So it is important, if you want to go to that level with people, to determine how do you want to feel when you're in this room.
So what is like the beige that every builder paints their houses? Now you say it's gray. Like how are those supposed to make you feel? Those very neutral tones that are meant to be, compatible with every furnishing ever made and not like put anyone off.
So, that sort of falls into the bucket of, what we do when I stage a house, because I do a lot of staging of houses too, where they're just trying to cast the largest net possible and make the house as generic and neutral as possible so that they can appeal to the greatest pool of potential buyers, right? They don't want to take it too far in one direction because if you're a person that hates green and they've painted their whole downstairs green, then you're not going to consider buying that house maybe. So they try and keep things very neutral, but there is a movement out there now in the design world where things are very white and black and gray. People are painting their whole houses, every surface, every wall, every trim, in white, and I think that will stick around for a little while, and then, I mean, it's already sort of starting to turn back, believe it or not, to sort of more of the earthier tones that we saw that were kind of, in the 80s and 90s that people ran away from in the 2000s and everything turned gray. But we're seeing a turn back towards some of those colors, surprisingly, or maybe not surprisingly. Maybe people are tired of everything being so neutral and they want to get back to a little bit more color.
Have you observed a cycle for when something first comes into fashion and when it is no longer in fashion? Is it years?
Yeah, it depends. It's interesting. So every year, Pantone will publish their color of the year, and Benjamin Moore will have their color of the year, and it's all kind of a marketing thing. But what's interesting is Pantone's usually the first one that comes out with it, and but even before they publish it, you start to see those colors coming out in other areas first. So like you'll see it sort of in fashion first. You'll start to notice when, the fall line comes out, there'll be some dominant color. And then sort of all these other trends are going to start to follow the home trends, whether it's for a couple of years and still a little bit now, there's like that emerald green color was really big. And so, yeah, there's definitely a cycle. I think that the white wall cycle is probably going to stick around for a while longer. It's kind of being driven by the whole modern farmhouse trend that doesn't seem to want to go away, um, which is, I like a lot of those elements. And, here in the Northeast, like we have actual modern farmhouses, it's not a contrived thing. But I do think that that's what's driving it. Even the exteriors of houses are driven by that trend towards white walls, black windows, black doors, black hardware, um, and even I think gray is sort of maybe kind of starting to be on its way out in terms of being the dominant wall color, and um, finishes color, but it's still hanging in.
Uh, what I've observed is like when something is really popular for a period, then it looks dated after it's no longer popular. How do you tell people to avoid that kind of uh, dated look in a few years?
So the best way to do that is to make sure that on your finishes that cannot be easily changed, like tile, like countertops, even cabinets, keep those classic, timeless, and get your pops of color in things that can be changed out easily, like light fixtures, rugs, pillows, even, chairs, artwork, things that can be swapped out easily. You can kind of make those the really trendy things and then keep kind of the bones of your house or your kitchen or your bath or whatever. You keep that more timeless. You're not going to be, as a stager, I walk into so many houses now and I can literally look at the homeowner and go, "You did this bathroom in the 90s, didn't you?" And they're like, "How do you know?" Like, "Well, I can pretty much see all the fixtures." So if you want your house to look timeless, keep your tile, keep your floors, keep that more classic and timeless, and get your trendiness out of things that can be swapped out a lot more easily.
You just mentioned that you also help stage properties. Can you please talk about that part of your business?
Sure. So, um, what staging does is it makes sure that the best parts of the house are visible to a buyer, and that it creates an emotional connection with a buyer. So whether it's an empty house that we need to bring furniture into so that people can see how the space would look if they were living there, maybe, and uh, coincidentally, uh, empty rooms make spaces look smaller. So as soon as you bring furniture in, it actually makes the space feel bigger. Um, so we do that for empty houses, but we also take houses that people are living in and really kind of amplify how it looks from in the photos and when people are looking, in person.
How do you tell
So
people their furniture is ugly?
very carefully. Yeah, I mean, it can be tricky, but you know what? At the end of the day, I'm trying to make them more money, and as long as they understand that, um, I am very careful to make sure that I explain to them why I'm criticizing them. I usually tell people, so here's how it's going to go down. I'm going to walk in, and we're going to be friends in the first room, and by like the fourth room, your head's going to start to throb, and by like the seventh room, you're going to want to throw me out. But at the end of the day, when the house sells in a week, you're going to want to give me a big hug. So,
Do you immediately know what you're going to do with a space or a house when you walk in? You
yeah.
know. Yeah.
Pretty much, I do. It's very easy for me after all this time to see exactly what especially in an occupied house where people are living. You you have to have that. I think you have to have that instant flash of the vision of what it should look like. And when people are living there with 3 kids and 2 dogs and 5 cats, and they're living their life, it can be hard to kind of push that all aside and get to where it needs to be. But I think that honestly separates the good stagers from the okay stagers. Like, you have to be able to see how the day of that photo shoot, how it should look. And you need to be able to communicate a clear path from how you're living in it to how you're going to market it, because it's not the same thing. And again, there's a lot of delicate and honest communication that has to happen if you want to get it there, because when people are selling their houses, it's usually a pretty emotional time. They can be selling it for good reasons because they bought a beautiful brand new house and they're excited to go there, but there's also a lot of times where people are selling because of the divorce or death, or they've lived in their house for 50 years and now they're going to assisted living or someplace like that. And you have to be really sensitive to the emotions that you're dealing with when, people get, as we know, people get really attached to their houses, and you have to navigate those waters really carefully.
I like that you make the distinction between living in a house and marketing it. I think that is a great distillation of what we're talking about, right?
Yep.
You
Yep.
can't be attached to your house if you want to sell it. You need to think about it as a business transaction, right?
Exactly. As a product, we say, we're marketing a product. And we just kind of hammer that home. The way you live in it is not the way you show it. And we get a house ready for sale, and it looks a lot of cases, almost nothing like how it looked when they were living there. And a lot of times the owners will come through and go, "Oh my gosh, if I could live like this all the time." I'm like, "Nobody lives like this all the time. You can't." It's not realistic.
It must be hard to visit people's homes with bad furnishings or bad room layouts. I'm guessing you just bite your tongue because you have to, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Again, it's sort of it, honestly, what I try to do before I walk into a lot of these houses is communicate with a broker that's working on the property and get a sense for how far they think I can push them. Because at the end of the day, I don't want to alienate them. I don't want to make them mad enough that they don't do anything. And it's really truly the job of the broker to set the marketing strategy, and I'm a piece of that marketing strategy. So I have to be respectful of what they're trying to do and help them accomplish that. As much as I think I'm driving the bus, and maybe I am, but I try to really be mindful of what they want to do. So if they tell me these people are not going to spend the money to do X, Y, Z, I'm not going to go in and beat them over the head to do that. I try and get them to do what I think they're willing to do with either the money they have, the time they have, the energy they have. You kind of gauge all that and kind of push as hard as you can. And at the end of the day, I kind of have to keep reminding myself that even if it's ugly furniture and it's not stuff I would ever put in a house, I'm still going to make it look 1,000 times better than if I hadn't come through there. So, I just sometimes have to do the best I can with what I have to work with.
Sure. So where do the furnishings come from?
So I have a warehouse of furniture and accessories and art and plants and everything, and so I will bring those things in and rent them out for a certain period. so that they can get great photos, because the photos are so important now. Back in the day when when we bought our first houses, people actually had to walk into the house to see the inside of the house. But everybody is finding their houses like sitting on their sofa scrolling through their phone. So the photos are incredibly important. So I'm always looking at it from the standpoint of how is this going to photograph, which I know you can appreciate
Mhm.
in your business. But that's what I'm looking at. I'm looking at sight lines. I'm looking at focal points. I'm looking at, you know, pops of color, or adding drama that I think will photograph well. Um, so I'm always kind of looking at it from that standpoint.
Do you give the photographer direction on how you want angles and stuff, or is that
Not
up to the
really.
no?
Nope, that's really up to them. And I tend to work with the same team of brokers and stuff over and over again. So I know their photographers really well, and I know how they're going to do things. And um, I don't really have to. I don't go there on the day of the that they're doing the photo shoot and style it. I'm usually there the day before. I'm trying to finish up as soon as I can, as close to the photo time as I can, so that nothing gets
Messed up.
ruined. Yeah, that's why I don't want the cleaning team to come in after I've been there,
Yeah.
because things have a way of getting shifted around, and then I see them in the photos, and it's
I didn't do that.
no, that's not where that pillow goes.
Can I guess that, like, when you travel, you're like shopping for accessories and stuff all the time? I bet you do, right?
Always,
Yeah.
always, and not only that, but my husband Jamie will be the first one to tell you that it's not that uncommon for, if we're staying at like an Airbnb or hotel, that I will start pushing stuff around, moving the furniture in a way that where I think it should go, or changing the lights. My pet peeve is
So I
lighting
was
that's too bright.
greatly impressed with. I hate that too. The first thing I do in a hotel room is figure out where all the lights are and then what I feel most comfortable in, right?
Right.
I was so impressed with your hometown of Marblehead, and you've lived in some interesting places, but you came back home after living in. Well, why don't you tell us where you lived, and then what made you want to move back home?
So probably the most interesting place that we've lived was Bermuda. We lived there for a number of years. We actually honeymooned there, and then we moved there the next year, and that was really cool and fun and
Cool.
as amazing as you think it would be. Yeah, and then we lived all along the North Shore of Boston, which is where Marblehead is. Spent a number of years in Salem, Mass, which is another really fascinating town. And I moved out of Marblehead, which is just a little tiny town of about 20,000 people, little coastal fishing village with a lot of houses still from the 16, 17, 1800s. Um, and I was not going to move back to Marblehead, but it occurred to me that every town we were looking at, every place we were looking at, I was just trying to recreate what already existed in Marblehead. So we decided to move back here, and it's amazing. This is an amazing little town. If anybody ever gets a chance to come up here, it has just such a rich history, and the architecture is amazing. The streets still look like the 1700s, and it's got a beautiful harbor, nice beaches. um, it's a very cool, it's a very unique little town. They're
I
not
wholly
paying me
agree.
to say
The
that.
I wholly agree. The historic architecture is reason enough to go. And even if you don't like the beach, you should check out the beautiful old buildings because
Yeah.
it's just beautiful. It's fun to walk around and look. So I
Yep.
always ask this question, but we talked about it in some detail. Uh, for our listeners, can you talk about your own house, please? You mentioned to me in our conversation it was not love at first sight, shall we say?
Yeah. So this is an 1850s Greek revival, and it has been modified over the years. I like to kind of think of myself as a little bit of a house detective, which, dovetails into my job as a stager. I'm kind of always looking at the architecture and how to make the most of it. But I like to go into a house, and when I can see that it's been kind of messed with a little bit, I try and figure out in my head what's original, what's not original, what walls maybe did they move. And so in my own house, I think I told you, when I went to look for sale, I opened the front door, and the front door hits my front stairs inside because it's the world's smallest front hallway. And I opened the door hit the stairs, and I was like, this is the stupidest house in the world. Who would buy this house? Why did they do that? And as I walked through that house, and I immediately started noticing other things like, oh, maybe this is cute. Maybe this, oh, okay, maybe. And it occurred to me that they must have at some point that somebody changed those stairs because the house was actually built by a housewright, and there's no housewright in the 1800s or even today that would build a house so that the front door hits the front stairs. So that told me that at some point somebody widened the stairs or reconfigured them in some way to make them easier to go up and down or some other thing in the house. But I really love this house. I love old houses. We have the wide pine floors. Some of these floorboards are, 18 inches or something. We put an addition on the back of the house about 4 years ago, and it was really important to me that the addition looked like it was part of the house and didn't scream out that it was a new structure. And I think we did a pretty good job, even down to we got the reclaimed wood floors from Pennsylvania that tie in nicely with what we already had here. And then we have this cool old beam that we used that was taken from a townhouse on Beacon Hill in Boston in the 1800s, and is still stamped with the mark of the lumber yard. We use that on our mantle, our fireplace mantle. And I don't know, the house, it has such a nice flow now, and it almost doesn't bother me that my front door hits my front stairs. Someday I'll figure out what that house really did look like.
Your house is beautiful. I love its exterior. I love its simple ornamentation. And it feels very comfortable in the living spaces I saw. It's just a nice house. And I think it's the perfect size too. I think you'd
Oh,
agree.
thanks.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
It's been a pleasure talking to you, Paula. Much like our previous conversations, is there anything you'd like to ask or tell our audience before we go? For starters, how can they get in touch with you if they want to help picking colors or staging a property for sale?
So probably the easiest way is my company is called New Leaf Redesign in Marblehead. My website is newleafredesign.com. That's probably the easiest, fastest way to find me. And happy to help, happy to answer any questions people have about color or save anybody some color anxiety. We like to call our color consultations stress less. So, if I can help just one person avoid that color stress, I'm
Hey, I
happy.
forgot to ask you a question. I hope we can go back here. So I'm
Yeah.
guessing it's easier if people have some idea of what they want with their colors. But what do you do if someone has no idea or says something like, well, I'm colorblind, or I don't know. That's got to be hard.
There's a lot of clues in the house or this space usually that will that I can start to work with. So it depends upon what the room is and what the space is. But if let's say it's a kitchen, you're always going to start with the elements that are staying, that are not going to be torn out if they're doing a renovation or even if they're just painting. So kind of back to that conversation we had a little bit earlier about, keeping things timeless and the stuff that's not easy to change, like a counter. If somebody is keeping their counters, that's probably going to be one of the first places I go to look for color clues, because I need to have something that's going to coordinate with that counter, because that's not going anywhere, or their tile backsplash, or their floors, or whatever. So that's one way that you can do it. The elements that are staying. Then, other things are back to that conversation about, how do they want to feel in the room? Do they want to feel restful? Do they want to So I just if they really have no idea, I'll just start by asking a whole lot of questions, and we usually can get there pretty fast. Depending on they usually know more than they think they do about what they want. They sometimes just don't know how to communicate it. So that's part of my job is to get them to be able to communicate, why are they changing it in the first place? If they really can't get there, a lot of times I'll say, then why not just leave
Mm-hmm.
it this color? And then that will, kind of, well, I don't, I actually was always thinking that blah, blah, blah. It's like, okay, now we have something to work with.
Uh, Thank you very much.
Sure. It's my pleasure.
Well, unfortunately, that is all the time we have for today. Thanks to Paula for joining us, and thanks to all of you for listening. Please remember to send us your comments, questions, and suggestions to fhbpodcast@taunton.com, and please like, comment, or review us however you're listening. It helps other folks find our podcast. Stay safe, everybody. Keep craft alive. Don't be scared to color.